Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today's founder is James Duane, the post-Revolutionary War mayor of New York City. But before that, let's go back to before the Revolutionary War, where James Duane was an incredibly wealthy merchant in that city who had already acted as Attorney General for New York, as well as the Indian agent for the state, where he was commissioned to negotiate with the Native Americans throughout New York on behalf of the colonial government. That being said, once these taxes start rolling in, James Duane is one of many merchants throughout the colonies who are unhappy. And Duane is actually sent to the first Continental Congress as a representative of New York. While he's there, he's actually a little bit less radical than even the not so radical delegates who were already there. In fact, James Duane supports the Galloway Plan of Union at the First Continental Congress. The Galloway Plan of Union was presented by Joseph Galloway of Pennsylvania and was kind of a new style government where the colonies would have a little bit of say in their taxation. Now, of course, this would go nowhere, and the colonists knew this. At the end of the First Continental Congress, Duane does resign himself to signing the Continental Association, which instituted the boycott against British imports. Now, this affected him as an importer with his merchant business, but that's okay. Duane actually gets sent back to the Continental Congress, and I want to side note here. Duane is the only person from New York who serves in the Continental Congress essentially non-stop from the First Continental Congress until the end of the war. That being said, Duane does go back in 1776, but he is not excited about declaring independence. And in fact, he leaves before independence is voted on or the document signed. Though to be fair, so did John Jay, who's another New Yorker who is a little bit more famous than James Duane. Now, Duane, unlike many other people in this exact situation, does not become a loyalist. He remains with the Patriots, and he ends up sticking to it throughout the rest of the war. Despite his hesitancy, he continues to act, as I said, in the Continental Congress. He actually ends up signing the Articles of Confederation, which is a little strange for someone to sign the Continental Association, skip the Declaration, and then sign the Articles of Confederation, but he does, and has his name on that first government of the United States. And he continues to play a really important role in New York State politics up until the British evacuation. Once the war is over and the British evacuate New York City and George Washington triumphantly returns, James Duane is the man elected mayor of New York City. This town that's been absolutely ravaged not only by the evacuating army and all the loyalists who left, but it had been burned earlier in the war. About a third of the city burned to the ground right as the British arrived. So he had a lot of work to do, and interestingly, he does a lot of work, and he does really good job. He ends up putting New York City on the path to very quickly becoming the most populated city and arguably most powerful city in the United States within the next 20 years. Again, during the Revolution, Philadelphia was where it was at. But after James Duane's tenure, things start to change, though we can give Alexander Hamilton also a good deal of credit for those changes. Now, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about with James Duane, and it does involve the evacuation of the city to a degree. You see, as mayor, he was able to sit as a judge on certain court cases and in the mayor's court. And one case called Rutgers versus Waddington came to his attention. In this case, there was a woman who owned a tavern, and then she fled the city when the British arrived. Now, 8 years later, she's returned and has her tavern back, but a loyalist had taken over her tavern and run it for all those years she was gone. And she claimed that she should be able to collect back rent from this person. New York had New York had passed something called the Trespass Act. And the goal of the Trespass Act was just this: to repay people who had lost their income. Meanwhile, loyalists had literally taken their business from them. Unfortunately, she was on the prosecution, and the defense team was being led by Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton argued, well, according to the Treaty of Paris, we are not allowed to seek retribution against loyalists in this fashion, and therefore the New York's Trespass Act itself is illegal. James Duane, as the presiding judge, actually sides with Alexander Hamilton on this and tells this poor woman she cannot collect back rent, despite having been a patriot the whole time. And what's really important about this is one of the first times you see a federal decision. The Articles of Confederation were not a federal government, but the Treaty of Paris ending the war was done through the Continental Congress. And the fact that their decision in the Continental Congress, their treaty and agreement, would supersede a state decision is a very telling sign of things to come in the years leading up to the creation of the United States Constitution. And it helps us reflect a little bit on people's attitudes at the time about, okay, well, who exactly is in charge, and where exactly is the maximum supreme authority on decisions of this nature. So that's a little bit about James Duane, a little bit about the Trespass Act of New York City. I hope you liked this video. If you did, do me a favor and hit like so more people can learn about the American Revolution with us. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. I put out videos 7 days a week, and I'll be back with another video for you tomorrow.